Hello my dear friends and welcome to StudyIQ. I am Joycey Joy and today in this lecture we will discuss about Bimal Jalan committee report. Now let us first understand what is the current affair. The report of the Jalan committee is finalized and this will be submitted to the RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India, soon. So this is the current affair. So in this context, we will understand what is Jalan committee report, what is it all about and what are the mandates in the report and how this report is significant. So this is very important topic for UPSC aspirants and also for any other aspirant who is preparing for RBI exams or SEBI exams or any other competitive examination. So let us start. Let us first understand what is the Jalan committee report all about. So this committee headed by Bimal Jalan, the former governor of RBI, was constituted in order to recommend appropriate economic capital framework for RBI. So what is meant by the economic capital framework for RBI? So economic capital framework here means that the reserves of the RBI, that is the excess of profit of RBI, or we can say the excess of revenue of RBI over the expenditure of RBI, that is called the reserves of RBI, how it has to be dealt with. So that is called the economic capital framework. So how does the reserves of RBI should be dealt with and what has to be done, how much has to be transferred to the government and how much RBI has to keep, that is regarding economic capital framework. So this committee, or we can rather say that the high-powered committee headed by Bimal Jalan for recommending an economic capital framework for RBI was constituted for this purpose. Now the committee has come up with its report and recommendations. So we will look at the important recommendations of this committee. The recommendations, the first one is regarding the transfer of excess capital from RBI to the central government. So the committee recommended that the RBI is the monetary authority or the monetary head of the country. So the apex monetary institution RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, should transfer the excess of its capital to the central government over a period of time of 3 to 5 years. So this has to be done in a phased manner. It is not that all on a sudden RBI has to transfer all its excess reserves to the government, but within a period of 3 to 5 years, the excess capital from RBI has to be transferred to the central government. Now, what is meant by this excess capital for RBI? So the excess capital for RBI means that the RBI, in conducting its operation, it will incur certain expenses. For example, the printing of currency. So this is an expense for RBI. So also RBI earns certain revenues. This is because the RBI deals with government securities on behalf of the government. So in operating with the government securities or other operations, RBI also earns certain revenue or profit. So the excess of revenue over the expenditure of RBI is called its excess capital. So the excess capital or the excess reserves of the RBI has to be transferred to the government. But this has not to be transferred in its entirety. RBI can keep a contingency fund with itself in order to meet the risk, which we will discuss later in this lecture. So we will also discuss about the contingency fund RBI has to keep. But apart from that, the excess of the reserves, that is the excess of reserves after providing for a contingency fund for the RBI, this has to be transferred to the central government. So this was the first recommendation. Second one, the framework, that is the economic capital framework, has to be reviewed periodically. So the recommendation of the economic capital framework is not a permanent one, but this framework has to be reviewed periodically. This is because the risk of the RBI increases or decreases over a period of time. So this is not permanent or this is not unchangeable. So the risk of the RBI can increase or can decrease. This will depend upon several factors, both internal factors and external factors. So depending on internal and external factors, the risk or the degree of risk of the RBI can increase and decrease. For example, NPA or non-performing assets. This is one factor or an internal factor that can affect the risk of the RBI. Now, if we take an example of an external factor, the prices of fuel is one factor that will impact the risk of RBI. This is because when the fuel prices increases, there is increased import bill for the country. So with the increased import bill, it will lead to depreciation of rupee. The value of rupee will come down. So we will have to pay more in terms of forex or foreign currency. So this is an external factor that will contribute towards the risk of the RBI. So both external and internal factors can change the risk of the RBI. This can happen the other way also. These internal and external factors can also bring down the risk of RBI. So depending on the risk of the RBI has to keep a contingency fund with itself. So that is why this committee recommended that the framework has to be reviewed periodically. This should not be a permanent framework. This has to be reviewed periodically. So this was the recommendation of the committee. I hope you have an understanding now. Now let us move on to the mandate of the committee. Why this committee was set up and what were the objectives of this committee. Now this committee was set up in December 2018. This was after the tussle between Government of India, that is the central government, and the RBI over the transfer of reserves from RBI to the central government. So this committee was set up in order to come up with the recommendation regarding the transfer of excess reserves from the RBI to the government. So the first mandate was to propose a manner in which RBI's excess surplus can be shared with the government. So this includes the proportion of excess revenue or excess reserves that should be transferred to the government, and also the manner, that is how it has to be done. So this was the most important mandate or the objective of this committee. Now second one was to review the global best practices. So the global best practices here means that other central banks around the world can be studied. It means that how does other central banks around the world perform with regard to the transfer of reserves. So this was another objective or mandate of this committee. Now considering all this committee has come up with the recommendations that we have already discussed. Now let us come to the contentious issue. What was the contention? So the contention here is regarding the issue of transfer of the past revenues. So the past revenues, how it has to be transferred, and second one is regarding the profits of the RBI. So these are the two contentious issues. Now let us understand about the stake. Now the recommendations of the committee is based on the assessment of the risk of RBI. We have seen that RBI makes an excess of revenue over its expenditure, and this is called the reserves or the surplus of the RBI. Now RBI will not transfer the entire reserves or surplus to the government. It will keep some amount with itself and the rest of the amount is transferred to the central government. Now how RBI has to keep the amount with itself? What are the factors? This is dependent on the risk of the RBI. So this committee recommended after analyzing and assessing the risk of the RBI. Depending on the risk of the RBI, it has to keep certain amount as contingency fund. Now if we look at section 47 of the RBI Act, the profits of the RBI are to be transferred to the central government after making contingency provisions. So this is according to section 47 of the RBI Act, that after keeping certain contingency provisions, RBI has to transfer all the excess surplus to the central government. And now if we look at the present status of RBI's reserves, RBI is holding much higher capital than any other central bank around the world. Now the proportion of risk and the reserves held by the RBI, if we look at, the reserves are much more than the risk. The risk of the RBI as a central bank or as an apex monetary institution is very less compared to the reserves it holds. It means RBI is holding a surplus of reserves with itself, and now the committee recommended the transfer of the surplus to the central government over a period of 3 to 5 years. So this is regarding the Bimal Jalan committee report and the recommendations of the committee. And this topic is very important for UPSC examination, especially for the upcoming mains examination. Now the RBI grade B examination is also to be announced shortly, and other exams like the SEBI examination, other banking examination. For all these exams, this is a very important topic, and this is a very good topic for discussion. So there are chances that, especially for RBI interviews and all, there are chances that the interview board can ask the candidate regarding his or her opinion about the transfer of reserves from RBI to the central government. So when such questions are asked, you should be authentic in answering those questions. So you can mention about section 47 of the RBI Act, which mandates that the excess of reserves to be transferred to the central government. So this will give an authenticity to your answer. You are talking based on facts. So this is all about the Bimal Jalan committee report. I'll meet you again with another topic. Till then, thank you.